An introduction to my novel, A Tale of Two Brothers. There was a sound of revelry by night, and Belgium's capital had gathered then her beauty and her chivalry. And bright the lamp shone o'er fair women and brave men. 1,000 hearts beat happily. And when music arose with its voluptuous swell, soft eyes looked love to eyes which spake again, and all went merry as a marriage bell. But hush, hark! A deep sound strikes like a rising knell. The sound that the lyrical voice hears is that of the cannon's opening roar. The 1,000 hearts beating happily are unaware that they are dancing on a powder keg, the Battle of Waterloo, which would change the fate and shape of Europe. This opening stanza by Byron in his poem Childe Harold's Pilgrimage sets the keynote to my novel. The late Victorian era was a period of optimism when its denizens believed in the advancement of science and the pursuit of social welfare to improve the human condition. They also believed that under the realm of the Pax Britannica there would be no more wars. However, in the subsequent years, these beliefs would be undermined by the historical events that followed, and turn out to have been delusional. As a child, I was about 16, I climbed up the ladder that led into the attic of the house of my grandparents in Bar-sur-Aube, and found a large trunk, the contents of which became an inspiration for this book. I wiped off the dust from the trunk, opened it wasn't locked, and found uniforms, medals, manuscripts, letters, and a diary. It was the diary of one of my great-granduncles, the British military chaplain Reginald Collins. I started reading, and with the stories my mother had told me about the chaplain and his brother Victor Collins, a librarian of the Prince Louis-Lucien Bonaparte, these characters began to people my imagination. They wanted to come to life again. My novel covers a period in the life of two characters from the late Victorian era. My great-grandfather, Victor Collins, a linguist and librarian, and my great-granduncle, the military chaplain Reginald Collins, who is referred to as the Padre in the novel, and describes the endeavor of both men to overcome spiritual, as in the case of the chaplain, and matrimonial impediments, as in the case of Victor's marriage. In other words, the man of God and the man of books are on a quest towards a fulfillment of their lives' goals. The story covers parts of their lives. We have the Padre, who participates in military campaigns of the Victorian era, and who also travels through the desert on a religious quest. He is interested in the ancient Egyptian religion and its ramifications for Christianity, as well as for the early forms of monasticism in Egypt. In the latter case, he wants to find evidence for the legendary belief that Egyptian monasticism had had an influence on early Irish monasticism. But why were the British fighting in those desert wars? They wanted to abolish slavery, create a more just society based on Christian principles, introduce modern science and medicine to create a more prosperous world order, and eradicate creeds that they considered were preventing progress. This endeavor to maintain peace and order in their colonies was to lead to what they called Pax Britannica. However, since the British dream of a peaceful world did not take fully into account the idiosyncrasies of the different peoples, the realities of these so-called primitive societies, and by imposing their values through wars and bloodshed, they often only produced resentment. And so we have this padre who is in the desert with the British Army. He is obviously the padre to the soldiers, but he has his own journey into the desert to find the monasteries of the early Christian monks, and he realizes that they have a mystical approach to the spiritual that is not manifest in later monasticism. Then from the desert he heads back to England via Malta, where he is elected to the Senate of the university. And it is during his inaugural lecture that he propounds his theory on the mysticism of the early Christian monks in Ireland. After that, he heads back to England and meets up with his brother, who at the time is living in Oxford and works for a prince as a librarian. Prince Louis Lucien Bonaparte was a nephew of the Emperor Napoleon, and a world-renowned linguist who prided himself on having at least one copy of a book in every language that was then known. He had studied mineralogy and had applied his scientific approach to the description of languages, although his fame rests on the description of the 7 Basque dialects. So on the one hand, we have the man of books, and on the other hand, the man of God, and both write to each other. These letters are the glue that hold the narrative together. And it's in these letters that the padre relates his discoveries in the realm of spirituality, while his brother describes his linguistic and literary activities, among which is the editing of the works of a female Italian poet. This whole picture of the two brothers is also overlaid by the Irish question, the struggle of the Irish for their independence from the yoke of British rule. The Irish had suffered under the paw of John Bull and were attempting to force the British government to cave in by means of terrorist bombing attacks and by supporting all enemies of the British Empire. In summary, this multifaceted book covers a desert campaign by the British, travels into the desert to Coptic monasteries, life in Oxford with a librarian employed by a prince with an amazing library. But the narrative is also overlaid by the tragic story of the padre's aide-de-camp, who is looking for his lost brother. The aide-de-camp of the padre has a brother who sympathizes with the Fenians, deserts the British Army, and joins the Mahdist movement, believing that this would further the Irish cause. And then there are 2 love stories in the book, and all these characters are tied together in a wonderful wedding ceremony that takes place in Abingdon on the River Thames. It is on this occasion that the 2 brothers reunite and envision each a brighter future. However, history itself will have the last say and pull the carpet out from under their feet. This world order as they know it is doomed, as history tells us. Does my book also have a simple message? This book is a journey into a past that I believe is in many ways still relevant today. In a nutshell, cherish your past, for it might hold answers for your present and your future.